Hi, Courtney. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Sarah. Thanks so much to you and the Qualified team for having me.
Okay, so today we're talking about the cookieless future. But to start, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and about 6sense and how 6sense is thinking about cookies in a cookieless future?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, for those of you that don't know what 6sense does or who we are, we help our customers uncover and leverage data to achieve revenue targets. And I've been with 6sense for a little bit over 5.5 years. I started on board to lead our field and partner marketing teams and then start our community programs as well. And just over the course of working with various customers and partners and being a user myself, I wanted to transition to product marketing to help continue solidify our position in the market as leaders. And so now I'm serving 6sense in a product marketing capacity focused specifically on our advertising capabilities.
Perfect, which is why I'm so excited to have you here, because I think as we talk about a cookieless future, I think advertising is probably the most impact. I think where everyone is the most concerned. So I would love to chat really quick. I think before we even get into like the strategies or what people can be thinking about from like cookies in general for marketers, I'd love to just have a rundown from you on what does cookies mean? Like if there's different types of cookies, how should we be thinking about them? How can we define them? And then more importantly, how can we use them in marketing, and what's changing at the end of this year?
Yeah, definitely. So I think we tend to complexify cookies a little bit and make them super technical. But essentially, cookies are pieces of information saved by our web browsers to track our online behavior. And the types of data cookies are storing are things like usernames, passwords, our search preferences, our interests. So it's things like that. And there are several different types of cookies. You've got your session cookies, your first-party cookies, your third-party cookies. But for the purposes of our conversation today, I want to keep it focused on third-party cookies, which the industry commonly refers to as 3PC. And as marketers, there's essentially two ways that we use third-party cookies. The first is to target our audience, and the second is to measure the effectiveness of those targeting programs. So really straightforward. But in the last sort of several years, as we've come up with different privacy laws and data protection regulations, consumers and privacy advocates have said, you know what, like we don't want to feel like we're being followed around by ads. If I am on Nike's website looking at shoes, and then I switch over to ESPN to check basketball scores for the March Madness tournament, I don't want to see an ad from Nike trying to get me to buy their shoes. We almost feel like this is creepy, if you will. And so some of the major web browsers like Mozilla Firefox, Apple Safari, they've said, okay, you know what? As users, we respect your privacy. And so we're just going to do away with third-party cookies. And Google, as the last major player sort of like standing, if you will, has gotten a lot of pressure, as you might imagine, to follow suit. And so they've said 2024 is the year we are going to start slowly deprecating third-party cookies. And by the end of the year, they're going to be gone.
That's so interesting. I loved your example of looking at shoes and then going on the internet, because the first thing I think of is 5, maybe 10 years ago, that kind of retargeting I thought was so cool. And especially being in marketing where I'm like, oh, I forgot about this. And now I see this ad and it was just so, I mean, it was impactful. It worked. Like it helped. That's why it became such retargeting, became such a like massive advertising strategy. What I think is so interesting is over time, as especially people listening into this session, a lot of us are marketers. We're so in tune to what's happening that I think we've all gotten almost too used to it, and we are turned off by it. Like it is getting creepy. We're like, man, it's just gotten to be too much. And as marketers, as times have evolved and we've all learned this strategy, I think it's just less impactful. And what I'm so excited to chat about today is, yes, this cookieless future is happening, but I feel like this is a way it's been going for a while. Like advertisers and marketers have been talking about their strategies that have been leading to, you know, less reliance on cookies and more like first party. So I'm excited to keep chatting about that because I think it's taken us in a direction that we've been headed for in a while anyways. So with that being said, okay, now we understand all the buzzwords. We know first-party cookies, third-party cookies. I how many times can I say cookies before I get too hungry? You are a marketer on this call and you're like, you know what? I knew about this. I knew this was coming, but now it's time for me to actually put a strategy in place. What is the first thing that you would do to start thinking about this and making an impact at your organization?
Yeah, I love your reference, in terms of thinking about, we've been preparing for this for a while now. I started with Sixth Sense in 2018, and this was a topic all the way back then. So it's been a long time coming. And I think as marketers, when we think about third-party cookies, we just have to address the fact that some of our current strategies and tactics are inevitably going to break. And so I'll just give a couple of examples. I think we can start with visitor retargeting. That's a common strategy that's pretty easy to wrap your mind around. But when you have an individual that comes to your website, but they don't take some sort of conversion act, like downloading an ebook or filling out a form, and then they leave your website, we may set up programs to try to get them back to the website. And this just isn't possible without third-party cookies. Another good one that's really common in B2C is affiliate marketing. So this is when you pay another person to advertise your product. Let's just take an example with me and you here, Sarah. I'm trying really hard to get back into running shape. I have no idea if you are, but let's just say you yourself are an avid runner. And you're not. Okay. But you're still going to give me the advice. And you wrote a blog on the top 10 best long-distance running shoes for women. I look at your recommendations. I love Nike. I click on Nike, and I go and I purchase the shoe. Nike might give you a percentage of that purchase for sharing your link and helping them share the product. But the problem here is, most common, what happens is I click on the link, I look at the Nike shoe, I can't decide. I go check out Brooks or Mizuno or Adidas, and then 10 days later, I go back to actually make the purchase of the Nike shoe. It's really hard to track what's happening once you leave the website visit. And so I think this is a great example of where the measurement side is going to come into play. If I go back 10 days later and make that purchase, as an affiliate marketer, Sarah, you're not going to get the credit for that. Another example, let's just take third-party data, right? So a lot of people to do targeting, and even our own customers will layer this on top of Sixth Sense account data. You'll work with a vendor like Oracle. You'll purchase a list that's, I want all users that work for marketing at technology companies with 5,000 employees or more, and the companies do $3 billion annually in revenue. Strategies like this don't work without third-party cookies. And so I think it's just really important that first and foremost, as marketers, we're taking stock of what are the things we're doing today that are working really well that mainly leverage third-party cookies. Then we can start to think about, okay, how do I shift those strategies?
Yeah, that's such a good point of going through all of those advertising strategies and trying to understand which one of these are leveraging third-party cookies. I think your example that you started with of retargeting will be such an important one for probably most people on this call that are in B2B marketing. I think that's a pretty common tactic. What I find so interesting about this is, well, I love retargeting ads. I've used them for a very long time. My background was in digital marketing before I got into demand gen. I'm curious to see if the quality of people that are converting goes up with this decrease in third-party cookies. Because if I think about okay, I'm retargeting someone, they've been to my website, they've done research, and then I follow them around the internet, even though they haven't converted, yes, they might come back, they might fill out a form, but is that ad that's driving them there, are they still a really high value, high intent or high value? Maybe not. Or someone who has come to your website, browsed around, left, and then a couple days later comes back organically. To me, that organic revisit is probably a better signal that they have a higher likelihood to buy than that retargeting. So anyways, it's just such an interesting that we might lose retargeting, but I'm curious to see if those visitors that are multi-session visitors that come back over and over again do convert at a higher rate. So I will be curious to see how that goes. And then it is also interesting to think about, yes, the affiliate marketing. For me, the biggest thing that concerns me about third-party cookies going away is attribution. And I think that's something, as someone in demand gen, we're always trying to think of the best way to like tie every single dollar spent to a dollar of revenue. But for a long time, we've been talking about, is it worth it? Like, is having all that attribution worth it? Or if your company is, if you're driving pipeline, it's converting at a really like good conversion percentage, that's what you want. So being able to see so granular about the attribution. So it's so funny that there's been like these ongoing conversations sort of happening in the demand gen market about attribution anyways. And I think this third-party cookie going away will actually help some teams make the push to get to an attribution space that isn't so tied to a one-to-one spend to pipeline ratio. And I'm excited for that. So anyways, that is my ramble. So we talked about auditing first, going through your strategies. But Courtney, what's next after you've audited? What would you do next?
Yeah, no. And Sarah, I will just add to that. I love the topic of attribution because it's so hard to do. It's always been hard to do. And if you're taking an account-based approach, especially with advertising, the traditional metrics, they don't matter. They don't, like, who cares if I go to Qualified's website and my sister goes to Qualified's website and George goes to Qualified's website. Now, if, I go and my boss Nate goes and Latney comes to your website, well, now that really matters because we're all at the same account. And so I definitely think it will hopefully, because measurement's going to be so impacted on by third-party cookies, I think hopefully it forces marketers to start really adopting some of those account-based metrics and looking at advertising as more of like an influence type of metric.
Yeah. I think we'll see a world where if people have been making that case to their boss for a long time, and then now all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, I can't report on it that way anyways because third-party cookies are gone. So hopefully we'll help drive them in that direction of a way I think the market's been going for a long time anyways.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so you asked me what's next. I think once you've taken stock of, all right, what are we doing that's using third-party cookies? Now it's time to think about, okay, we can't do that anymore. So where can we move that money? And I think one really great option is to consider walled gardens or closed networks. So those are channels where users are primarily logged in. So it's really good to think about, now it's time to try Facebook and Instagram. I think in our space, LinkedIn is already a really, common channel for B2B marketers, but definitely LinkedIn and definitely Google, because Google properties are all going to be protected as walled gardens.
That is, I love that, rethinking the strategy. So if you are looking at you audited and you're like, oh shoot, I'm spending 40% of my advertising budget on retargeting, I don't want to lose that 40%. I think a lot of times with marketing budgets, you can lose that money. So it's like, okay, now after that audit, let's figure out a better way to spend that money. And you can still do it in advertising. To your point, you can do it on things like LinkedIn or Facebook or places where those people are logged in and you can identify them. And again, this feels like something we've been doing for a long time anyways, but figuring out where to reinvest that money in places that aren't reliant on third-party cookies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I know we are getting close to our 20 minutes here. So I would love to ask the final question here. Marketing teams, how can you get the most out of our marketing calories in a cookieless future after we've audited and reevaluated our strategies?
Yeah, I think so. And we've already sort of said this a little bit, but my advice is just to approach it the same way you've always approached any of your marketing strategies. Measure what works and put more money into those strategies and turn the things off that aren't working. I think it's important to keep in mind, though, that like some of the strategies and tactics that we've been doing that may have previously worked, they won't work anymore, right? So some of our things are going to break, but as long as you're testing what works and you can measure that against your KPIs, then you can move your money around, like we've just said, to where you know it's working as needed. I definitely think it's going to be a little bit of a turbulent year for sure. It's trial and error, but I think we just have to stay agile.
I totally agree. If you're listening to this, I would say start now. If you're relying pretty heavily on ad spend, start doing research and figuring out how much of that ad spend is reliant on a third-party cookie. I would start that immediately after this call. start to figure that out. And then if you have a high percentage of your budget that is reliant on third-party cookies, two things that we've talked about is, one, start thinking about where else should you respend that money, and start thinking of a strategy for it and how you're going to go to your executive team and defend why you would reallocate that budget versus losing that budget. I think in a time where resources are scarce, it can be easy to just say, oh, we'll just take that budget back and just put it somewhere else in the company. If you know that it's going to be impactful to keep advertising, start working on a strategy now to defend that budget. And then secondly is I would start thinking about your attribution. If you're currently doing a very reliant, like last touch, last click to pipeline, and that is coming from a lot of ad spend that's reliant on third-party cookies, start brainstorming now the new way that you want to measure this. To Courtney's point, is it an ABX? Is it talking about account engagement? Is it looking at account movement? But you are going to have to transition away from that strategy. And it's better to start thinking of it now, asking your peers now versus waiting until November and panicking when you realize all of your attribution's about to break and you might lose your budget. So
yeah.
That being said, Courtney, thank you so much for joining us today for this session. For everyone else that's listening, we do have a checklist to help you bring back to your own organization and look at some of the things that we talked about today and work your way through that list to make sure you are on track for the end of this year, the end of 2024, when Google's third-party cookies are going away. So go ahead and download that link, and that's going to give you your checklist to follow along. Otherwise, Courtney, thank you so much for joining us today. This was super helpful.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much, Sarah. Have a good one.